Maybe we can make it a bit more interactive. We've got a smaller group. Maybe not. So I guess I just wanted to say, I've been here in Sydney for a week now. It's been awesome. My first trip here, wasn't sure what to expect of this city or country or anything. I've got sunburn, recovered from sunburn, got sunburnt again. It's been amazing. Lots of different food experiences. Went down to Bondi Beach. I was expecting it to be super touristy, but it's actually quite cool on a weekday. So I've been having a great time, had a lot of good conversations. So in this talk, I just want to share some thoughts with you. If you're kind of starting out with modernization, thinking about modernization, joining a company that's about to do some modernization, I hope that these ideas will give you at least one or two things to take away or think about differently. So the first question any company should be asking is, yes, you might have lots of legacy, or you might want to do some big re-architecture work, but you might not need to. Anyone want to kick us off with some reasons why you wouldn't want to start doing some big modernization work to your legacy? Any thoughts out there? Are you still here? Are you supposed to be kicked out?
I didn't have anything to contribute to the question, but we prefer the term heritage rather than legacy.
Okay.
It's had less negative connotation.
See what I mean about this guy?
Something to be treasured.
First 2 minutes, he's already in there. So since you make a good point, the way we talk about things impacts how we treat them. Legacy has some negative connotations. Let's say we have some heritage systems. In my experience, heritage is normally a bit older than legacy. Maybe legacy is like 10 years old and heritage is like 20, 30. Short little segue. I was doing some work with the Norwegian government a few weeks ago. I just dropped by to say hello. And one of the architect people who supports lots of engineering teams, he gave this fascinating insight. And I thought, wow, I've just never thought about things that way before. And basically what he said was, when he talks to his developers, he always asks them, is your code clever or easy to understand? And that's a pretty normal question. But then he says, like, here in the Norwegian government, we have systems that are 40 years old. Your code might be read by someone 40 years from now. Think about them. Just a little segue. Interesting story. You might not find that interesting. But seriously, if you're thinking about modernizing, you might not need to for various reasons. If your company is already successful, already has market share, it can be very difficult for competitors to take that away from you. Even if they have a better product, they still have to convince your customers that they're more reliable, that their product is not only better, but will be around for a long time or support their needs in the various ways they have. You might already have big budgets, the smartest people in the industry, might have so many advantages that your heritage systems aren't actually holding you back in any business respects. But obviously, there are lots of reasons to modernize your legacy and heritage systems. As we all know, code gets older, more difficult to work with. We get stuck in the mud. And usually, as the software gets older and more difficult to work with, organizations start to build up processes and red tape and restrictions to make sure we don't break things or cause problems. So we kind of get some synchronization between the software complexity and the processes around it. All starts to get very difficult. We get stuck on old technologies, less productive, more maintenance costs. Can't use the latest and greatest. And companies get complacent. They think just by existing, we'll be okay. They overestimate how their brand or their existing market share might be loyal to them. And so in this respect, those companies that do have these vulnerabilities are at risk of losing their market share. And modernization does make a lot of sense in these cases. A good example here is my friend Orlando. He worked at OpenTable around about 10 or so years ago, back when Pete was living in London, before he moved over here. And OpenTable realized they could see that there were competitors entering their market and they were innovating faster. And the engineering department and the product department and the senior leadership were able to recognize that if we don't modernize, we will lose the market share. In OpenTable's case, they stopped all feature development work and just did modernization for almost a year. That's probably not the strategy that works in most companies, but it's always worth thinking about what's the right balance in your context. Another reason you might need to modernize, in fact, you probably will at some point, is even if you make great decisions, even if you have the well-designed code and a great architecture, many of the assumptions that your system is built on may or could change over time as your company strategy changes. You might build a system to support one set of use cases, and then you build some other use cases that don't quite fit with the existing one, and your system gets things get built on foundations that aren't optimal for what you're building. Good example here is a company called Vinted. They started out selling, I think it was women's clothing, and they built a system to sell women's clothing. And then they started to sell other kinds of products, and they noticed that adding new features became much more difficult. We're trying to sell things that aren't women's clothing in a system designed for women's clothing. And so do you fix those fundamental abstractions, or do you just keep building on top because you need to get new stuff out to the market? Very often that's what happens, those foundations remain in place. So as a summary, I would say modernization is about the business advantage. If your systems are causing a competitive disadvantage, then modernization makes sense. It's about improvements on a business level, which kind of makes sense. So in this talk, I'm going to cover three topics. The first one is, I think, more conceptual, about why you're modernizing and the kind of mindset you need when you're modernizing. Second one is tools that I think are useful. Pick some tools that maybe aren't as common. And then the third part is I'll look at how you can get started and how you can keep your modernization journey moving. Those things can be quite difficult and challenging. So the first one is around flow. What do I mean by flow? So if you rewrite your old system in new technologies, new programming languages, new libraries, new frameworks, new infrastructure, you will get some benefits. Modern tech is more productive in many cases, but just changing the tech won't fix all of the coupling and those design abstractions I was talking about in your system. So a modernization only of tech won't give you the full benefits. So what's needed to actually get the full benefits of modernization? And what we're doing when we design an architecture is we're impacting how work flows in our organization. The way we shape our software boundaries indicates which type of work can get done by changing only one part of the system, and which kind of work has to touch different parts of the code base and has different teams working on it. So this is what's called a value stream. It's about the sequence of activities that you go through to build some new features, build some new product stuff in your organization. And I think this is really the fundamental building block of architecture, thinking about how the work flows and how the choices we make affect how the work flows. My words aren't flowing because my mouth is dry. I need to quickly rectify that situation. Have a good value stream set up here. So when we think about value streams, we also need to think about change coupling. We might have software that's aligned to these value streams. We might have no physical dependencies in our software. We might not have function calls or API calls or database integration. Probably shouldn't use that anyway. But we might not have those things. And we might think, I have a loosely coupled architecture. This will enable flow. There's no coupling. But there's hidden coupling. This is what's called change coupling. We need to be careful that when we think about coupling, we're not just thinking about physical dependencies, but also the change coupling. And so basically, if you have to touch different parts of the system to implement a new feature, that's called change coupling. And that's why creating a loosely coupled system is a bit more difficult. So I think if you're starting out with modernization and thinking about architecture and you're thinking about flow and value streams, there are four really crucial components to doing this effectively. And there might be a fifth one, which is around data mesh and data products. But I won't talk about that today. So domain aligned, we want to identify boundaries. We want to align our value streams with different areas of our business that are somewhat loosely coupled. That's what I talked about earlier. What kind of features are we building? How do we define boundaries around certain kinds of work? That means when we implement new features, you only have to touch one part of the system at the same time, one subdomain at the same time. Second part is the outcomes. To do architecture effectively, we need to think about what are the business outcomes that each value stream contributes to. That can help us to make decisions like, have we got the right boundaries? Are we happy to have this coupling and complexity here? And it can also help the next aspect, which is teams to be empowered. If we really want to have flow, then architecture will enable us to have those loosely coupled changes of work, but we still have to think about the coupling in the organization. How many external dependencies does a team have in terms of making decisions? Can they decide what to work on? Can they decide how to implement it? Can a team prioritize their own work? If all of those things are yes, the team can work much faster. There's going to be some dependencies and some outside relationships, but a lot of decisions can be moved into the value stream. And finally, we have the software piece. Can the software for this value stream be changed and deployed independently? So I think those are the four fundamentals. I've got another talk tomorrow where we'll talk about these in more detail. I'll touch on those a bit today. So a good example of this is a company called ICE. It's a royalty calculation company. My friend Casper Gunya works there. It's a very difficult domain to work in, high scale, trying to work out how much does each person get paid when a certain piece of music is played, lots of split shares, complex relationship, matching data about artists and music in different systems. It's very complex. And when they first built their system, kind of grew organically around technical boundaries, around words like import, export, for example. And so in this situation, common in many organizations, because the software wasn't loosely coupled and wasn't well aligned to domain boundaries, to understand one part of the code base, you had to understand lots of other related concepts that you ideally wouldn't want to make changes. So the cognitive load was higher, took a long time to test and deploy, more dependencies. And so, just fairly unproductive. Teams not able to get work done. The flow in this case wasn't very good. So Casper and his team applied those concepts, had the mindset of value streams, domain-driven design, team topologies, and they were able to achieve a more loosely coupled architecture, which was aligned to these domain boundaries. Teams were able to have a more focus on certain areas. They were able to make more decisions and deploy faster. And what's really important about this example is some of the stuff over here, because they did have very clear metrics and business outcomes. It wasn't just, you've got a nice architecture, teams can own small parts of the system. They had some very clear outcomes they were trying to achieve. So the first one is they reduced ingestion processing time by 80%. One of the most important jobs they have is to get the royalties paid as quickly as possible. Sometimes it can take weeks or months for people to get paid. They wanted to reduce that time. So the ingestion process is a big part of that overall lead time. They've improved that by 80%, and they also had a 5x increase in the matching process productivity. So imagine there's some automated parts and manual parts. They were able to optimize a lot of those things. So these are the kind of metrics we're looking for here. These are the kind of outcomes we're looking for. So we know what we're optimizing. And if we make good architecture decisions, we can move those metrics forward. Another key point here is around what you modernize, what from the old system persists in the new version of your system and how it persists in the new version. So over time, a lot of the functionality in your system might not be needed. It might not be useful. And if you just simply take the easy approach, or what feels like the easy approach, let's just rebuild the old system with all the functionality. You might spend a lot of time modernizing things that just aren't that useful, and you'll miss chances to simplify your system. And there's an interesting report here from Pendo. Don't know how exactly accurate this number is, but what they're saying is 80% of your system is probably unused or rarely used features. So if you can find out what they are, your modernization will be much faster, much cheaper, and your new system will be much simpler. So So that's definitely something to keep in mind. How do we figure out what's actually needed, and in what form, how can we simplify a lot of the things we currently have? So I like to think about modernization as a full stack, but not the front end, back end, not the JS on the front end, Java on the back end. It's really thinking about all the different things you could modernize as part of your journey. So we talked about the software and the infrastructure, definitely some benefits there, but also the user interface and the user journey. Lots of chances here to actually improve the user experience. If we're going through all this effort to change the code and the software, it's really not much extra effort to fix and improve the user experience by looking for opportunities there as well. And again, by thinking about the user journey, that might lead us to simplifications in the software. We also have to think about the domain model. How do we represent these domain concepts in our code? As we saw with Vinted, they had all of these concepts and abstractions around women's clothing. But now, modernizing is a chance to build these abstractions and concepts in your code, in your domain model, that are optimized for all of your use cases, that the best overall model. And a lot of times in the legacy systems, you get a real drift in terminology. You're using one language in the business, and in your legacy code, you've got your heritage code, you've got all these other words. You're like, a word over here, what does it mean over here? I was talking to one company fairly recently, and they told me it takes 7 weeks to define the requirements for a new feature. So, maybe you're just not very good at prioritizing, or maybe stakeholders don't know what they want. And they said, no. They said, it takes us 7 weeks to figure out what we want the product to do. And we have to spend 7 weeks figuring out which bits of the code actually need to change to implement that new feature. And that's that drift over time. Probably some code complexity, but also translating from business speak to the current code's tech speak. And then we have the domain itself. Changing our business rules and processes, all those things can be modernized as well. And this is exactly what happened when I worked for the UK government in 2016. We worked on a project for business property taxes, and we had user researchers and UX experts in the team. Every week, every sprint, they were going out, talking to citizens, asking. Pete knows about this because he worked in the government as well. He's probably seen my code and everything. In fact, he was on the platform team and he had blocked a lot of the things I wanted to do. But you're still at HMRC now, working from here in Australia. How's the time zone thing working? Interesting. But if anyone wants to talk about this, you got me and Pete. We can talk about some of the interesting stuff. A lot of things did work really well. A lot of the platform work they were doing made a huge impact, helped us immensely in the team I was working in. So user researchers, UX people, going out every sprint, taking developers with them, just all of that knowledge coming back. And we're just thinking about the whole user journey, the code itself. It's all just one thing that's constantly evolving based on feedback. The domain model changed as well. We were introducing new concepts and terminology. There was a lot of confusion there, but it was the right time to clarify these words like check and challenge and appeal. Different people had different understandings of those words, and it was important to clarify those before we implemented them in code and started building abstractions on top of them. And the domain itself, interestingly, we had, I wouldn't say carte blanche, but we were told, or one of the key ideas behind this project was we've had these processes that have existed for 100 or more years, I think it was in some cases. And we actually had to change the laws in the UK to support the new process we were proposing, because new technologies meant new things were possible. So you might not modernize the laws in your country for every project you're working on, but it's definitely a possibility. The full stack of modernization is always worth thinking about. And in different parts of your system, you might modernize more parts of the stack or less, depending on what's useful and relevant. So with this in mind, with this kind of modernization in mind, I want to talk to you about 5 tools I think are very useful. I'm going to talk less about the technology side because you're probably experts in a lot of the tech already. So let's get into this. And the first tool I would say, possibly one of the tools I use the most, is listening. Listening is a very important skill, and there are ways to apply listening to get some really good results out of this. So the first one I find is listening tours. You just go out, talk to people. Some people are nice, some people are like Pete, but you want to get all of their insights and what's important to them before you start modernizing. You identify what we talked about, what's working in the old system, what's not needed anymore. What abstractions do we have based on old ideas? And also, this is a great chance to start building relationships with people, because when modernization does start and you want to get buy-in for your big decisions or to put some product work on hold to do some technical modernization work, if you've had some chats with these people, you've listened to them, that bit of trust you've built with them could be the differentiator between them saying, okay, fine, we'll put this work on hold, let's do some modernization, and them saying, no, these tech people, they're just always wanting to modernize stuff. In fact, that happened to me a couple of years ago now. I was working with this new company. I spoke to a lot of the developers and architects, and they were saying, we've got a lot of legacy. Pete would have been unhappy with them because they used the wrong words. We've got a lot of legacy. We've got it was an insane number of stakeholders all trying to put work in their backlog. They were being pulled in lots of different directions. A lot of modernization is needed here. A lot of those organizational issues need addressing as well. So to me, it was a very clear case. When I speak to the CEO to try and get his perspective in one of these listening sessions, the CEO says, all my developers have OCD. They're always talking about rewriting old systems. And that is the kind of switch you want to make in these sessions. You want people to realize, no, it's not just tech people with OCD. When they come to us talking about making technical changes, it's because there's a valid business reason, and I trust them that there is a business need to do this. There's also one thing I would add on this one, which is the whole concept of modernization. What does it mean in your company? When you say the word modernization and you talk to a product manager or some other person who's away from the code, do they think modernization equals tech? Or do they think modernization equals business improvements that are important to me? By having these sessions first and not jumping into the tech, you get to shape that narrative yourself. You get to tell people this is a business thing, it's about your needs, and the tech will come later. But it's very easy to do these listening sessions wrong. It's very easy to approach topics in the wrong way. It's very easy to say things like, I know you're very unproductive in your job, and you have to use this horrible CRM. So we're going to switch to Salesforce. You've just told me I'm unproductive. You've just told me the tool I like sucks. You just told me the solution to my problem that might not even be my problem. Not a great way to have these sessions. In fact, you really just want to try and be as open as possible to begin with, just to let people talk and to guide the conversations. The conversation might start with how are you doing? People say that a lot here, don't they, in Australia? How are you? Everywhere I go, it's like, how are you? My Uber driver's like, how are you? I haven't heard good day, mate. It's all, how are you? I was in the bar and they're like, how are you? Don't know why people say that. I don't know if I like it or not. But anyway, you might start your conversation with, how are you? And then you can just work with that. Yeah, I'm having a good day. And then you can ask them about their day. And they might say, oh, we had this issue in production today. It was a bit uncomfortable. And you can say things like, is this a common problem, or is this an important, or just one of those one-off things that happens? And then you can take the conversation where you think it might be interesting and not just rush in with, give me your top 5 problems and I'll fix them all for you. It's all a bit direct and harsh. Obviously, different cultures approach things differently. I worked with a Canadian company and the CTO was Dutch. And he said to me, yeah, these Canadians, you need to push them. In the workshop, I wanted to push them because he's very direct and Dutch and they're very reserved in their opinions. So I think, appreciating the cultural aspects is important as well. So that goes back to the point about business objectives. If you just set out to modernize your system and you don't have business metrics you're trying to optimize for, it's going to be very difficult. And that's why these listening sessions can be very useful. And that's why I bring you to the second tool, which I think is impact mapping. I find this to be a useful tool. It's been very effective to me. So I've not always been someone who's good at talking to business experts, talking about things in their language, about what's important to them. And with impact mapping, you can do that pretty easily. Very often in these listening sessions, you might start off with, how are you? How's your day been? And then you want to get something a bit more concrete. How can you get the conversation into a place where it's a bit more concrete and defined, something you can take away? So impact mapping is a great tool. You can start anywhere here, but the big business objective is normally a good place. So then you can say something like, okay, so you had this production issue, not really a major thing. So tell me, what is big to you right now? What has to change over the next 2 years for you to be happy with this company, with the progress that's been made? And what does a bad year look like? What has to be, if you don't achieve something, what would make it a terrible year? And those are your big business objectives. And then you can start asking, so who's going to be involved in achieving that objective? What kind of audiences, what kind of people need to be focused on? In this example here, there's a big revenue number and they're targeting enterprise users. And then you can talk about what are the metrics that feed into that objective that need to change. So here we've got accuracy rates, lead times, as we saw with the example from ICE earlier. And then you get to deliverables. Here are the modernization efforts you'll implement, and you can connect them all the way back to that business objective. So whenever someone says to you, all I'm hearing is AWS, probably more Azure here, hearing about all this tech stuff, about AI, how does any of this fit in to what we're trying to achieve as a company? You can say, oh, very easily, here's what we're doing, and here's what you want. Very simple connection. As you do this with different stakeholders, you'll get different answers. It's not simply a case of they know what they want and they tell you. You have to kind of tease it out of them and then realize, different people want to go in different directions, and you might have to navigate that process yourself. But at least you can start here and get visibility of what different people think is important for the company to achieve. So then we get to the third tool, which is Wardley mapping. So why is Wardley mapping important? I'll talk you through the technique and then explain why I think it's a really useful tool and a very common tool. So the idea is you create value chains, not a value stream, different kind of value. You start with some kind of user or persona, and you talk about what kind of user needs does your system meet that are important to them. And then you get to the tech stuff. What are all of the capabilities we build to enable that user to have that user need achieved? So you might have the mobile app, some back-end service, some other back-end service. Could have a lot of microservices, some infrastructure. What level of detail you go to, how deep you go is down to your artistic interpretation in that particular moment. It's quite flexible, but that's the basic idea. So what does this give us? Well, now what we have to do is decide which stage of evolution does each of those components belong to. Over on the left-hand side in Genesis, these are new ideas that your company's experimenting with, research and development. Could be useful, could be the worst idea ever. We just don't know yet. Over on the right-hand side, you've got boring old table stakes commodity features. There's no real chance to differentiate here. All the innovation's happening a bit earlier, a bit over to the left. So if you're modernizing and you have this picture and your stakeholders are agreeing with you that each component is in the right place, now you can start to formulate how you modernize, where you might invest a lot of effort and where you might want to simplify things or reduce costs or even switch things off and not modernize at all. So in custom, that's when things have been validated and there's a lot of potential for innovation. Moving quickly is very important there. As you come across to the right-hand side, now we're talking about cost savings. And that's important. We don't want to be talking about parts of our system where the business feel like, this is a boring old thing, we want to reduce costs, and you're saying, yeah, we're going to modernize that with a new tech stack, we'll be able to innovate super quickly here, just a disconnect there. You can talk in the language that they will understand and make choices that will make sense to them. But with Wardley mapping, there's another step as well. You don't just make your modernization decisions based on where the component is now. You also want to think about the future as well. So how quickly and why is each component evolving? If all of your competitors are building the same feature, then it will probably evolve very quickly. The industry will arrive at some standardized, consistent version, and the innovation will stop. So if something is in custom now, you might feel like, yeah, it's super important to modernize this. But if it comes all the way to commodity in just 1 or 2 years, you might decide, actually, the focus is much more short-term here. I worked with a property management company in the States a couple of years ago, and everything on their map was going from left to right in less than 1 year. And I said, oh, so innovation's not important here. You just copy your competitors because everything's simple to copy. And he went, no. He said, we want to be the company that's always getting our stuff into the market first. Even if we can't keep an advantage, we can be seen as the company that's always there first. Like, we're the most innovative, we have the best tech, and that's important to our reputation. And those are the kind of conversations you can get out of this. So then we get to tool 4, a slightly different tool for a different purpose, although some similarities. And this is event storming, technique I use quite often in a lot of different situations. And the first one's big picture. The idea with event storming is you can map out parts of your business, your current journeys and processes, and then you can start to ask questions like, what's needed? Where's the current complexity? Is it useful? Where can we simplify? Where can we add new things? And event storming works by bringing lots of stakeholders together, your developers, your testers, your product people, UX people. You get a real detailed view. You get to see all the different parts of your business from these different perspectives. And so you're not guessing, have we got some weird complexity or manual processes here? Do marketing have a different word for this concept than one we're using in the code? Everyone's in the same room at the same time. You can just ask those questions, have those conversations right there and right then. And event storming works best in a good space, to be honest. I think a room like this would be a pretty epic event storming. I'm just thinking how I would do it in here. Would I do it on the glass at the back, or would I go on the wall here? Or, to be honest, you could go all the way around, depending on how big your domain is. But, something like this size. In Canada, we got lucky last year. The CTO showed me a picture of a room he had, and I went, if we take out all the chairs and tables and rip everything off the walls, we could probably have a good session with 10 people, and we were trying to do it for 60 people. And then he said, okay, I'll see what I can do, basically. And he comes back a couple of weeks later, and he's like, so the building our company's office is based in, there are some floors that are being renovated, and nobody's moved into them yet. So we had this whole floor of a big building, huge room. We had like walls like this, just everywhere. And that was epic. That made a huge difference. We could have teams. We mapped out this one flow. I think I have a picture in a minute. I'll get to the picture.
How many days did you?
So how many days did it take? In that case, we were there for a whole week, a bit shorter day on Friday. Doesn't have to be a whole week. Yeah, I'll show the example in a sec, then we can talk a bit more about this one. So another kind of event storming is called process modeling. And basically, this is for being a bit more granular, a bit more detailed, and it's good for mapping out the future state of your processes. So big picture, what's the current mess? Future state, what's this nice new version we'd like to have? And what we're talking about here is the business, the domain itself. We're not just talking about the tech. We're talking about the business processes. Event storming is also a great tool for actually starting to define your architecture. When you map out this business process, you have all these events, these domain events. I'll show an example in a second. And you can start to decide, how would we split up our system into these different areas, into these different subdomains? I talked about earlier, what we're looking for is different parts of our business where we can implement new kinds of work and not have to touch different parts of the system. And that's what we're doing here. Which parts of our business look independent, where we implement new kinds of work independently? So a boring example here, e-commerce with the search and browse, cart and checkout, ordering in your domain, probably much more interesting than this. But that's the basic idea. So the fifth and final tool is a tool for choosing your modernization strategy in each part of your system. Getting this right is crucial, I would say. You don't want to have a global policy where you modernize the whole system to the same level of detail on both a tech and a functionality side. So you might decide we're just going to encapsulate some parts of the system. We've got some old legacy. We don't want to change it, but we still need to use it. You might publish a domain event or put an API on top of it and say, that's good enough here. In other parts of your system, you might decide we're going to rethink the whole thing. We're going to change the government laws, completely new tech stack, completely new infrastructure stack, everything like a blank canvas. And then there's lots of stuff in between those two. And I think about this as the two different axes, as kind of levels that you can go up. Probably it's not exactly a linear choice, but it's kind of similar. So with the infrastructure, you've got with what I call platform modernization, you've got the infrastructure. Staying on the same infrastructure or changing infrastructure, on-prem to the cloud, that kind of stuff. VMs to serverless, that's the first level. Then there's the programming languages and runtimes. Are you staying on the same tech stack or moving? You've got data storage, integration, libraries and frameworks. These are the choices you have on the tech side. And then on the functionality side, as I talked about, you have expose. Expose what's there now without really changing it. Or maybe you want to polish it. Maybe you do want to make some changes to the current system so the code's easier to work with, but not on a large scale, just some small tweaks and changes. And then you've got remodel, which is keep a lot of the existing functionality, but just remodel the domain model so it's easier to evolve in the future, more of a large scale change. And then rethink, as I talked about, just change everything. The code will just be a fresh new code base. And there is a sixth tool that's not on the official list, but it's an honorable mention. It's a tool called CodeScene by a guy called Adam Thornhill. And this tool works by analyzing your version control history. And it can give you some pretty interesting insights about which parts of your system are changing together. So event storming is a great way to get people together to map out what they understand. CodeScene is a way to analyze your system, how it currently works, and use that as insight into what your future architecture might look like. One of the CTOs I work with, he used CodeScene to answer the question, should we fire all of our contractors? And basically, he used CodeScene. Because CodeScene's on version control, it can tell you which person made changes to which parts of the code. So very simply, using CodeScene, he was able to visualize that there was a significant part of the system that had only been touched by contractors. So if you fired them, you lose all that knowledge about that part of the system. So last bit of the talk today, I just want to touch on a few things about if you are thinking about modernizing and you do get to this point in the journey, how you can get started and how you can keep things moving in an effective way, because that project management piece is always very difficult. So the first thing I would say is you don't have to use all of these tools everywhere. Wardley map the whole system, event storm the whole system, probably not an effective use of your time. What I do recommend is trying to deliver something in the first 3 to 6 months. It's always good to start getting stuff out there, to start learning. A lot of people might be critical of modernization. They might feel things like, yeah, we tried to do this before and it never went anywhere. Just resistance. And the sooner you get something out there, the sooner people start to realize, yeah, this time it is happening. This time we have modernized something. We do see engineering delivering modernization, and business stakeholders are happy with it, supporting it, encouraging more of it. So you can get some good motivation there. So one of the first difficult questions is, where do we actually start? And I wish I had some more concrete advice for you, but I don't really, because it's a very difficult decision. So if we think about the 4 kinds of choices we have, we can start with something that's easy to modernize and gives immediate value, the low-hanging fruit. That would be an obvious starting point, but very often that's not the case. Maybe something that is new and doesn't touch the old legacy could fall into here somewhere, but then we're not learning how to refactor the legacy. So it's maybe not the complete value we're looking for. So usually we're in the bottom left or the top right. The top right is we're going to go for it. We're going to modernize something big and complex because it's valuable to us. If we can break this out of the old legacy, we'll be able to add new features much faster and we'll get some real benefits in the market. Or you go risk averse. Let's start with something small and simple. Let's find our bearings. Let's validate some assumptions. Let's put some foundations in place. So you might think, well, why wouldn't you start small? Why wouldn't you be risk averse? That's the obvious decision, right? It just gives you a chance to start safely. But what can happen? Actually, that can be a good question. Anyone want to tell me why you wouldn't want to start down here? Any thoughts on that one? Pete's ran off, so I can't pick on him, so it's going to have to be someone else. Yeah, so definitely on the right lines there around the rewards. What I've seen happen is developers will go and start modernizing some parts of the system that they feel are a good starting point. And there's a decent amount of budget involved in doing that. And then people on the business side start to ask, why are we spending 6 months on this thing that's not important and we're not building product features that are important? So sometimes people want to see something out of this. So either you do move a bit further to the right to give them something more valuable, or you have to control that narrative and explain, we are going to get to here, but it's important we start here. So either, get something more valuable or be able to control that narrative. And again, those listening sessions can be a good chance to build that trust. What else was I going to say? Yeah. So obviously the risk tolerant has a lot of risks involved in that. I saw an example where the company was like, we need to build this new thing and we're just about to start modernizing. Do we build the new thing in the old stack or this new modernized stack? And the business was like, it has to be delivered in the first half of the year, in the first 6 months of the year. And they thought, we can build that in a new modernized stack in 3 months and we still have a 3-month buffer. Therefore, we'll build it in a new modernized stack. 1 year later, they didn't have a line of code in production. It was so difficult. This was a financial company, and just putting the processes in place, getting the networking in place from the cloud to on-prem, hit so many hurdles, and so many people whose job had always been to just say no. Now we were trying to find, how can we do security while also being a bit more agile in how we work? So if you go here, and there are deadlines involved, that is really getting towards the top right-hand corner. You need to be very comfortable that you can hit those deadlines, or you take a split approach. You build it in the new system and the old system as a backup option. So touch on the workshop aspect earlier that you were mentioning, how to do this. So we have this concept of a Kickstarter workshop. And the idea is when you're starting that first piece of modernization, it can be good to get together in person, bring all these different stakeholders together, get a nice office space like this one. This was the thing I was talking about. This here is a small portion of an office floor that's being renovated. And we had the whole office floor. We also had strong paint smells coming through from the other rooms that are being painted. That kind of put a bit of a downer on things, but by the second day, we were all high from the paint and didn't recognize it. But yeah, this one was a pretty amazing workshop. And what we try and do in these workshops, the format we recommend is you go from like the business through to the implementation and kind of a roadmap. And you want to come out of here with a solid plan of what we're going to modernize first. You've had those different stakeholders have been in the workshop, so they've been part of it. They know it's not a tech thing. In this particular workshop, this was day 3 or day 4, I think. On day 1, we found out that the lady who worked in sales, she had a 180-step manual process, and no one had ever known about this because she'd just been working, getting her job done, not waiting for IT, who were taking a long time to build new features. And that's the kind of thing you're looking for here. You don't want to modernize the old system and realize, There's a huge piece of manual work we didn't even know about. This is the picture I wanted. So at the end of the Kickstarter on day one, we had this whole process mapped out, and we had these yellow strips across the top, which are the different subdomains. After this one-day workshop, after the first day, these won't be your final domain boundaries and software boundaries, but it's a good starting point, and it's a good chance to ask questions from different stakeholders, like where does sales and marketing see the boundary between their work, for example? We had data scientists in here as well. And another thing about these workshops is it's about that mindset refresh. It's about people thinking like, this time it is different. This time it will be different. This company had always had a very strong gap or a strong silo between product and tech. And in this workshop, the CEO was there. That's actually him there. He wasn't part of the workshop itself. He was just floating around. And he told the CTO who told me that, he was like, wow, the company's never worked this way before. A lot of these other people felt that way as well. Like, we've just never done anything like this before. And so the workshop can be a great way to define your roadmap, to define your architecture, to set some priorities, to choose that first slice, but also really changing that mindset and getting people to think like, this modernization might actually work. It's not completely dead. Let's see what happens. Let's give it a try for 3 months and see where we get to. But the workshops are only one small thing. And you can have the best workshop, but still, after the workshop, you don't do anything. Things go back to how they were normally. So if you're going to be doing a modernization program, you need to think about what structures do we have in place to keep things moving? How do we stop people going back into old habits? How do we stop product work coming in and taking over from modernization work? When I worked at Salesforce, we were promised we would get to do a lot of modernization work, and we didn't do basically any in a whole year because it crept back in. We could have learned from this. But yeah, just thinking about the structures. What processes and structures will you put in place to make sure things get moving, to make sure things don't get stuck? One of the concepts me and my friend Eduardo talk about, something that we've observed in journeys that tend to work out well, is the concept of an architecture modernization enabling team. And the idea is this team doesn't do the architecture. It's not a team that makes decisions or does the design. It's a team there to support the journey. The team works between different stakeholders. And over time, the team's involvement should go down. It's a temporary type of team to get modernization started, to make sure things are moving, and to make sure that teams themselves are independent and able to keep working. So at the start of modernization, you want people with good architecture skills to train teams, able to work with stakeholders. But you also want people who are able to step back and empower the teams to make changes themselves. And it can be very difficult sometimes. A lot of technical people don't necessarily have those skills. But I think it's something you can work on. I don't think anybody can't be a good coach or facilitator, have that mindset. It just takes some practice, really. So that's basically it. What did I talk about in this talk? As companies become successful, you become vulnerable to smaller, fast-moving companies that don't have all your legacy and heritage and baggage that's holding you back. And modernization is about changing that balance. It's about you being a successful company and one that can innovate quickly. But that means modernization is more than just a tech change. It's about the abstractions. It's about how the teams are organized. It's about how you work. It covers a lot of things to do it successfully. I talked about these 5 different tools and techniques. You might not use these exact tools, but I think you need something to replace them with. Each of these tools serves a very important purpose. And if you don't use these tools or something like them, I would be worried that you might have a gap in your thinking, or just something will be missing. And then finally, as I was talking about at the end, a lot of these tools here might give the impression that I'm saying, do all these workshops, map out everything, do all this Wardley mapping. But really, what I'm also trying to say is try and deliver something in 3 to 6 months. Try and balance that discovery and delivery. You don't have to see modernization as a bunch of phases. You can be discovering certain parts of your business while you're modernizing others already. I don't have 2 physical copies available. That was from my old talk. I have 1 copy available of this book. I thought I changed that earlier. It might be the wrong slide deck. So basically, I wrote this book a while ago. It just got launched recently. It's quite a long project, started in the pandemic, and it doesn't have any one-star reviews yet. So you could win this copy and be the first person to leave a one-star review. If he wins it, he'll definitely leave a one-star review. I know. That's why he's here today. So what's missing from here? If anyone can tell me what's missing from here, what you would add to this list of tools, you can have the book. First hand that goes up. Code scene. I kind of did say that already. I'll give you a second chance. What else would you add to this list? Okay, I'll have to pass it on to someone else. Sorry. Sorry, he was first, sorry. But he might not have a good answer, so you're still in with it. What was that, sorry? Persona modeling, more in the UX space. Yeah, I think that's a good one. I would definitely want some tools like that. Looking forward to that one-star review. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. I'm not going to be a consultant anymore, so this doesn't apply now. Here are some resources. If you have any questions, let me know. So I think you had some questions about the workshop format, right?
How often does the budget of modernization affect the end result? If the budget is too high, is it too risky?
How often does the budget affect the end result? If the budget's too high, is it too risky? Not really thought about that perspective before. I mean, if the budget's low, that's normally the common situation. What tends to happen is people want to do modernization, but they don't want to stop doing other work as well. They don't put enough effort into modernization. That would be the main problem. But could you have too much money? I think you probably, I wouldn't say I've seen that. Actually, I have seen that in the UK government. Basically, what happens is you get these big budgets, and you just end up having these big contracts with the consultancies. Like, here's 100 million to build us some small app that never gets delivered anyway. And I saw this myself. We had this one project, and we were building some new modernized service, and we wanted some data from an old legacy system. An intern could have done that work in a day. The consultancy said it's going to cost £20,000 for us to produce an estimate of how much it will actually cost. So yeah, you can have too much money. Definitely you can. Outside of government, I don't know. I don't know about that one. I think you definitely could. It could go to your head a bit, and you start throwing money all over the place. Probably good to have some constraints, but yeah, I don't think I have any great experiences on that one. Maybe someone else would like to share something here around having too much money. Does anyone here have too much money?
I guess we have. In the past, just a startup, lots of investors, lots of cash going around. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have a proper domain specified and a solution. So we just kept iterating and spinning our wheels, going round and round and round, and never actually delivered anything of value apart from, lots of well-trained devs, because we learned lots from it, and how not to do something. So yeah, I guess it does happen.
Thanks.
Thanks for the great presentation. So my question relates to how you approach thinking about the actual platforms that you're modernizing to. And the reason I ask is because oftentimes these modernization projects can, as I'm sure, I'd be interested in your perspective, what kind of time frame. I'd be thinking multiple years in terms of that. So it's more of an evolutionary architecture approach. So it's more like a continuous modernization rather than a single big project. So you've got to make a call as to the platform I'm investing in now needs to last many years. But each NDC you come to, it's like there's like new technologies, new platforms. So how do you go about the process of selecting the platform that's like a multi-year investment?
Yeah, so how do you choose a platform? In my experience, everyone has their favorite cloud provider. Or when I worked at Salesforce, it was like we want to have this big announcement that we're partnering with Google. Want to have this like big partnership, and it's like, yeah, we're going to use GCP because we want to have a relationship with Google, a public relationship. And then a few months later, it was like, we also want to have a relationship with AWS. So we need to have some stuff on AWS, some stuff on GCP. So we have these public relationships. Yeah, so choosing the tech stack overall, good example would be HMRC, as I was talking about with Pete. So Pete was on the platform team, and what they chose at the time, they chose Scala. So back in probably 2015, the platform was first created, and they chose Scala. How it started and how it ended, we can talk about that in a bit more detail later, perhaps. But I think the idea was they wanted to create this platform that was seen as modern, seen as forward-thinking, that would be exciting, would encourage people who wanted to be working with the latest tech to come and work on it, to try and really shift this balance of the government's old reputation of old, boring tech, old Oracle databases, and all that stuff. So they chose Scala as a programming language. That was the only language you could use on this platform. But there were important consequences as well, more important reasons to do that. By standardizing on that tech stack, they built all kinds of tooling out of the box. So to create a new microservice, for example, I feel like I'm being tested now. Do I remember it correctly, or have I forgotten how it worked? Basically, you ran a Jenkins job, added some config settings in a GitHub repository, and your new microservice was set up. You had all these environments set up, metrics, monitoring, logging, observability, load testing. You had libraries built into the application template, all out of the box. And you could be putting code in the QA environment in a couple of hours. And production wasn't that far away either. So you can probably achieve that in most tech stacks these days. So I don't think that's a concern. But I think, yeah, one of the key reasons would be what developer experience do you want to have, and what tools fit in that developer experience, and then how many tech stacks do you want to support. I've worked with companies that said every team can have their own tech stack. Well, I didn't work with this company. I spoke to them a couple of months ago, and they were like, yeah, we said that 5 years ago. Now we regret it, and we're trying to get teams back onto one tech stack. So I think there's, probably a few different concerns. One's around the image. Do you want to have this like Scala, exciting, trendy thing? I think the boring option is what people feel comfortable with. And I think there's also how many tech stacks do you want to support? And sometimes like what's the CTO's favorite tech stack can also be a reason. In addition to like the example at Salesforce where it was like a public marketing thing. Did that touch on the key bits, or did I go around it a bit? Okay.
Thank you for the great talk. One of the questions I have is like, whenever I've done modernization, one of the challenges that I have is when you actually cut over customers, especially when you have a large scale application that's being used by lots of millions of customers generating a lot of revenue. When you actually cut over, because your MVP within 3 to 6 months may not be feature rich. So then you have to ask customers to sort of switch between two applications, because then they have to do different things. Or if you wait for a long time, then you don't get that feedback loop as fast. So how do you manage your customers in a modernization project?
That is a great question. That is one of the hardest parts of modernization, and there's a lot that can go wrong here. You've got the new system, which is coming online, and the old system. You've got customers using one or the other. Sometimes they might be using both, and usually, if they're using both, you have to keep the data synchronized. That adds another element of difficulty. I would say there's a few things that come to my mind. One example is when I worked with an American company, and we were working with not an external customer, but an internal agent. who processed internal support cases. They were quite complex. And we mapped out their process. We did event storming, actually, and she just said, why don't I just show you my work? And so we threw the Post-it notes away, and she just started showing us how she does her work. Took a real case from the ticket, started doing some work in one system, then had to use another, then had to click on this drop down with 50 options. And the developers were like, yeah, we can fix this. We'll give you one system. You won't have to use 3 systems. You'll get one system with a simple UX that does everything you want. And she was like, no, don't do that. Because, well, we said, why? Why don't you want a new system? And she said, because the old developer said that. We used to have 2 systems and now we have 3 because it never got finished. So I think there's that. I think that can apply internally and externally. You know, will this get finished? That's always a risk there. People might be worried that things will get more complex. So what are some good strategies when it's external customers and you want to switch them over? I think this came up a bit recently around which customers to switch first. I think switching enthusiastic customers first, those that are asking for something, those that want something that the new system does and the old one doesn't. I think that's always a good one. And I think there will always be some customers that are really just reluctant because they don't need a lot of what the system does or the current version works. And usually I think that's kind of around some incentives, trying to create some kind of incentives that will make them feel like, yeah, there's going to be a benefit to switching. Maybe you can reduce the costs for them, maybe the price is lower, or maybe they get something free, all those new features. Yeah, I think it usually has to be some incentives. Whenever it's just there's a new system and it works like the old one and they're not getting any benefits from it, so I think it's always very difficult in those situations. And yeah, at Salesforce, we had to keep running some old legacy systems because there was a contract and the customers were like, yeah, we don't want the new system. We're just happy with the current one. And because we had the contract, we had to just keep the old one running and we had to have like a bunch of developers working on it, keeping it running. And we wanted them to work on the new stuff. So yeah, I think that's what comes to my mind. Do you have any other thoughts or anything you'd like to share? Maybe you have some tips you've encountered yourself. Oh, the mic's gone now. Sorry about that.
I think, as you mentioned, it's probably one of the most difficult challenges to solve. Like you said, putting on like the enthusiastic customers, or also customers who are, especially if you're looking at sort of a value stream, like you mentioned, whether it's the easiest one or the one that's most revenue generating one. It's also getting the customers who are like, as in the easy mapping. So what I mean by that, like one of the things I've done is, we've had customers who had 10 accounts, for example, migrate them first compared to customers who've got like 20K accounts, who are much more complex, essentially. So you can kind of use that strategy to test your system, because this new system is not as mature as your old system is to be able to handle all of the different scenarios. Probably.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you. How are we doing for time, by the way? Do we still have time for more questions, or? Oh, we don't have any anyway. Cool. Have you got the 1-star review already?
I was going to say, have you heard of I think it's a Martin Fowler term, or maybe it's strangler fig pattern?
Yeah, strangler fig pattern, definitely. That would be the pattern where you modernize a system piece by piece, where you're trying to potentially, this is a situation we talked about where you've got bits of the system which are new, bits of the system which are old, and they still have dependencies between them. So yeah, definitely recommend that pattern. That's like the textbook incremental modernization approach.
Have you ever seen somebody implement the strangler pattern and then finish strangling the underlying legacy system? Ever? Like ever?
I don't know if I have, because I think it doesn't always make sense to completely kill the old thing. There's a lot of things that I talked about where still serve some value, but it's not worth either replacing or killing. What I think is a more interesting question is, have I seen situations where not enough gets strangled? And definitely I would say yes on that one. And that's the kind of problem I was talking about before. doesn't get finished, new priorities come in. I think that's really one of the key functionalities, the key purposes of an architecture modernization enabling team, to really keep that momentum moving, to try and make sure that if modernization really is important, that it gets the airtime it deserves.
And isn't an architecture enabling team just an old-fashioned project team with a program manager and a change manager?
It could have a project manager. The company I was working on just before Christmas, they had a project manager in their team because I don't want to make disparaging comments, but the architects didn't have those project management skills. And in an architecture modernization enabling team, you could have other skills as well, change management people, other kinds of coaches. So in some respects, it is one of those teams. This is a pattern that we observed. It's kind of like one of those teams that's applied in the context of modernization. So it's definitely not something new and fancy and nothing to make a big song and dance about.
Just last one. When you help a company with modernization finish the task and everything is going fine, in a couple of years they still need, we need some more changes. Do they or someone replace your role after you finish your job, and who that role is?
You mean me personally?
No. Yeah. If you are going to if you are helping a company with this kind of projects, after you finish your job, is there a role that replace your role there for ongoing changes?
So I think as a consultant, what I always try and do is share as much of my knowledge and skills with the enabling team as possible. At first, it will be me and my colleagues who run the event storming sessions, and we'll work closely with them. And then we'll try and hand over so that they facilitate the event storming sessions. So just trying to embed. That's kind of, where is it? That's kind of this one. This is the AMET tries to share their knowledge, and that's similar to what I think is important as a consultant. So the company doesn't become dependent on consultants, and you transfer all of that knowledge. So yeah, definitely, they should have all the skills to do this themselves.
Thanks. Just a question on something that you touched on is, how do you navigate the challenge of both wanting to modernize an application, but also your business still wanting to develop new features and bring them out to customers, or perhaps even using the old system?
Well, at Salesforce, I didn't handle that very well, and we just built new features and didn't modernize. But I think there's a few different aspects to this. The one I touched on today was around having clear connection to business outcomes. So if someone says stop modernizing, it's clear that there will be certain business outcomes that won't be achieved. I think the other one's about building trust. So if you as an engineering person are talking about modernization, they understand that you're not just a geek with OCD, but someone who thinks this is the right decision for the business. So there's, clear connection to the outcomes. There's the trust aspect. And then sometimes there's the being a difficult person aspect and just saying, no, we are going to do this. And how far do you want to take that? And then a fourth option. So I worked with some people over the last couple of years who were good at conflict resolution. They were good at designing workshops to help people, have these kind of debates, structuring different kinds of activities about how to go one way or the other. There's a whole world of like liberating structures, a book called Liberating Structures, that could be useful in that fourth bucket. Yeah, those are the four things that come to my mind. I think my brain's like, I got my brain debugged earlier in Layla's talk, and it's just not working very well now. Still fixing itself.
Just one comment in response to that. One of the sales pitches that I've found works quite well in that space is speed of development. With modernization, you decrease technical debt, which increases the value of the delivery of per hour of development. And that's a good way to communicate the value of modernization as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Having a model in your company of how modernization benefits. In the book, there's an example from a company called Mobile.de, a German company. And basically what the CTO did was he introduced this concept of cost of change. And basically what that means is whenever they build a new feature, the system has more functionality, but the cost of change increases. That new feature makes the next feature much more difficult. There's more difficult to implement because the system is more complex. And so they arrived at this model, which is whenever we build features, cost of change goes up. Therefore, we spend a certain amount of time investing in reducing cost of change. I think that worked really well. Sometimes technical debt or code health or code quality still got that technical jargon, but cost of change, that's the example I use as default. So whenever you ask for a new feature, cost of change goes up. What are we doing as a company to reduce cost of change?
Okay, we probably should wrap it up soon. We've gone way over time, but maybe one quick one. Has anyone got another quick question?
I think you've tortured me enough. Thanks.